We primarily deal with data analysis, looking for information manipulation or foreign influence in Taiwan's information environment.
When you talk about the disinformation, misinformation campaigns, and also, the tools that the Chinese are using for that.
The worst of all is that we have pro-PRC media groups here.
And I think we should learn from Taiwan.
Hello and welcome to Connected. I'm Divya Gopalan. Now, some of the world's biggest democracies are heading to the polls this year. In 2024, the United States, India, Indonesia, and Bangladesh are among the countries choosing their leaders. Taiwan is also holding critical elections, with its president Tsai Ing-wen having to step down after serving 2 terms. Overshadowing this vote is the issue of China's claims on the nation, and threatening the vote, a flood of disinformation and campaigns to distort facts to try to sway voters. And to talk about the impact of cognitive warfare and understand the extent of the disinformation circulating, we're joined by Chihao Yu, who is the co-director of the Taiwan Information Environment Research Center, or the IORG in Taipei, and from the Indian capital, New Delhi, Namrata Hasija, a research fellow with the Center for China Analysis and Strategy. Thank you both so much for joining us. I'm going to start with you, Chihao. Can you give us a quick overview of your work with the Taiwan Information Environment Research Center?
Yes, thank you for having us. So we are a Taipei-based civil society private organization. We primarily deal with data analysis, looking for information manipulation or foreign influence in Taiwan's information environment. That's including social media platforms, news media, and web forums, and so on and so forth. We're also working with a variety of experts and professionals to look for ways to reduce information manipulation from political science, from psychology, from neuroscience, also looking for ways to improve Taiwan's public discourse to make Taiwan's democracy a better one.
And Namrata, you study China's influence operations in South Asia. Can you give us a brief explanation of what that entails?
Thank you for having us, Divya. So my center, which is the Center for China Analysis and Strategy, we basically focus, of course, on contemporary China. So other than the influence operations in South Asia, where we are basically focusing on what the Chinese are doing in Nepal, Bangladesh, Sri Lanka, and India, we also look at the Chinese internal politics. Like we also published a detailed bios of all the Politburo members, and we are about to publish bio profiles of the Central Committee. We also look at the PLA, and we look at the Western Theatre Command, especially because that is of direct consequence to India, unlike Taiwan. Because that is what is responsible for if we have any clashes with the Chinese. So my center basically focused. It's the only center in India that uses actually primary sources, and our research is based on Mandarin sources rather than we don't look so much. Of course, we use it, but we don't look so much at the Western sources. So our data, it's primary data, and we put in our own analysis.
And Chihao, you also look at Mandarin content and sources from several countries. I don't need to ask you this, but I will ask you. Tell us which is the worst offender and which countries you're looking at.
Yes, so like you said, we focus on the Mandarin content. That includes Taiwan, the PRC, that is China, Malaysia, Singapore, and sometimes Japan, because Japanese uses the Han characters, right, sometimes. And then, of course, in Taiwan, it's not just our hunches, it's the data showing us again and again that the PRC, or China, is the biggest foreign influencer in terms of information manipulation here in Taiwan, related to all sorts of domestic and foreign issues that are important to Taiwanese politics and Taiwanese lives.
Namrata, both India, Bangladesh, and Sri Lanka, as you mentioned, are going to the polls this year. Can you tell us what China's interest could be in those regions? It's quite obvious here in Taiwan, but in those regions, perhaps it's a bit more intuitive.
I think before the show also we were discussing this. I was discussing with Chihao that sometimes getting data is very difficult. Because there's a very thin line when you talk about the influence operations, when you talk about the disinformation, misinformation campaigns, and also the tools that the Chinese are using for that. And sometimes even the people who are being targeted, sometimes, of course, knowingly they are doing it, but sometimes they're doing it unknowingly because, they cannot probably understand, how the Chinese go about it and how they kind of operate. Now, like I'll give you an example because this show you're focusing more on the misinformation or disinformation campaign, but I feel the influence operations part is also very important because this is how they make inroads. So they are making inroads in different sections of society, and when the time comes to actually manipulate it or to use these channels for disinformation and misinformation, it's easier for the Chinese.
So Namrata, I want to go delve a bit deeper throughout the program and all the different tactics and different ways the influence operations can be effective and how disinformation is spreading. But before that, I want to bring it back here to Taiwan, where there's been a rise in fake news in the run-up to the presidential elections, which are taking place on January 13th. The government has warned of China's efforts to sway the outcome. TaiwanPlus reporter Rick Lauert meets those on the front lines against Beijing's cognitive warfare.
A deep fake video purporting to show Chinese leader Xi Jinping denouncing Taiwan's presidential candidates and saying the country's upcoming elections are futile as he is the rightful leader of the country. It's been debunked by local Taiwan fact-checking organisation Kofacts, but has already caused upset in the nation, which China claims as part of its territory.
This type of content might make people feel like democracy is useless, election is useless, and what people do is nonsense.
Lee works with more than 2,000 volunteers to find and debunk disinformation and run a chatbot that flags fake news shared on messaging apps. She says disinformation is up 40% ahead of elections. It's often difficult for the general public to determine the veracity of the information they are seeing. The government here has warned that China could be behind the massive amount of disinformation now out there. Beijing has been known to use a combination of economic coercion, military intimidation, and cognitive warfare like this to threaten self-ruling Taiwan. And their tactics are evolving. Taiwan has seen an uptick in videos, graphics, and memes spreading false information about candidates and parties considered less friendly to China. This content is easier to share and harder to detect.
Well, memes and illustrations are an easy way for people to absorb the information nowadays. We know younger generation, they are now really keen or interested in reading a whole report. So the memes become very, very effective.
But Taiwan is fighting back. Recently, at a temple in central Taiwan, hundreds of people joined disinformation training by a local civil defense group.
觉得很恐怖。我们一定要有这方面的认知啊，才不会被洗脑。
我觉得它是一个很棒的力量，就是让大家意识到我们有自主权，然后我们要怎么样可以防卫，就是替自己做好防卫。
Fact-checker Lee publishes her disinformation updates in multiple languages on her website. She wants to share Taiwan's battle with the rest of the world.
The democracy issue and freedom issue is also in common. I think that is also one way to let people feel how Taiwanese people is different from Chinese.
China is stepping up its claims over Taiwan, and leaders here have warned that the country's freedom, democracy and peace are at stake in this upcoming vote. For Taiwanese, the battle for these values is increasingly being fought online. Justin Wu, Alex Chen, Klein Wang and Rick Lauert for TaiwanPlus.
Chihao, what are some of the most prevalent ways China is using to manipulate public debate here in Taiwan?
So let's take YouTube, for example. From our data set, we can already see that there's some YouTube accounts that are directly controlled by China, by PRC state. But there's way more accounts that are anonymous that's harder to detect, like the video suggested. But they're also spreading state lines, state-sponsored content. And then, of course, you have the influencers that speaks more than Mandarin to try to influence public opinions, not even just in Taiwan, but other places about Taiwan. So there's really multiple layers of Chinese information operations, to which some are easier to prove with data evidence and some are less so. So a lot of groups in Taiwan here are working very hard on doing just that. to prove how influential China is in our information environment.
Tell us some of the narratives that are being spun that seem to have taken hold.
Right. So there's so many. Where do I begin? We've been doing this for a while now. Let's take our recent report on a group of narratives that we call U.S. skepticism as an example. We've traced these groups of narratives since 2021. There's at least 84 of them spreading in Taiwan during important events here in Taiwan, elections, big policy debates, and so on and so forth. So they've all been trying, these narratives have been trying to discredit US and discredit Taiwan-US partnerships, and saying that the Taiwanese elites is colluding with US to betray Taiwanese people, right? This is to discredit our democracy, our government, our elected officials, to sort of let people lose faith in our democracy. And of course, these narratives sometimes go very far to the level of conspiracy theories, often without any evidence, all to sort of stoke more extreme emotions and deep-rooted fears sometimes in our society, to destabilize our society here in Taiwan, especially before important times like right now, before a presidential election.
Right, and for our wider audience, the U.S. is one of Taiwan's biggest allies and backers. Now, I'm glad you brought up U.S. skepticism. Jasmine Lee is a Taipei-based analyst for the Bauer Group Asia. She researches false information designed to convince the Taiwan public that America is their greatest threat. Take a listen.
So when we look into the disinformation of the U.S. skepticism, over 50% of the skepticism is actually coming from within, coming from Taiwan. And the other 50% that is coming from externally from China. And a lot of time they are using their state media and or some of their very pro-state, state-affiliated media. And sometimes they will also use some of the Chinese diaspora media, like media in Malaysia or media in other Southeast Asia that it's a Chinese media, but it's all for their diaspora. And these kind of disinformation will come back through social media back to Taiwan or spread to Taiwan. So these are the disinformation coming from externally, but we also see some of this information coming from within, from Taiwan.
Namrata, are you seeing a narrative spun like this in India by China in its push for influence?
Yes, there are like a couple of examples. See, of course, we cannot compare what they're doing in Taiwan to what they're doing in India, because there it's more and it's more open. Here it's subtle, and you really have to look for it. And only if you are analyzing it, looking at it from that point of view, you come to know. Now, I'll give you a couple of examples. When the Galwan Valley incident happened, so I started, following a few accounts, because we saw that they're using Twitter and Facebook more, because they are, of course, trying to influence opinions here and build a narrative here. And of course, I saw that there were around 150 such accounts on Twitter. Most of them would have a Chinese man or a woman wearing a army, jacket and a Mao cap, and most of them were opened either in February 2020 or March 2020. And they started posting only after the skirmishes started in April, because we of course know about the Galwan Valley incident in June, but the skirmishes had already started in April and May. So they started posting. Then they started tweeting about the Indian army. So they started writing how corrupt the Indian army is, and China has actually taken over quite a bit of Indian land, and the army could not do anything about it, because what they are busy wife swapping, which is a very common thing in the Indian army. So they tried to discredit the Indian army. So these were the kind of narratives that they were putting forward. And these people had huge followers, let me tell you. Most of them would have followers maybe 60,000 or 100,000 or maybe more than that. And there were many Indians also following, these people. So these were the narratives that they were pushing.
Galwan, was that border dispute between Indian and Chinese soldiers, just for our audience who may not be as aware. So Chihao, let's talk about how the mainstream media now deals with this. How aware here in Taiwan is the mainstream media of possibly information, manipulation or disinformation, and how vigilant are they here?
Well, the situation really differs depending on which media group are you talking about. We have good media that are diligent, like the public television services, but we also have very partisan media groups here in Taiwan. But the worst of all is that we have pro-PRC media groups here. It's not just that we feel this way, it's that they repeatedly demonstrated themselves as being pro-PRC. Actually, related to the military theme that Namrata was just talking about, in July 2023, last year, the second largest newspaper here in Taiwan, the United Daily News, reported with several reports about a allegedly secret government meeting about the US directing Taiwan producing bioweapons. So this created a huge event here in Taiwan talking about the truthfulness of this alleged report, right? But later on, our prosecutors actually proved that these government meeting records are fake. But the damage is already done.
And Namrata, speaking of mainstream media in India, and there's a large number of them, how easy is it, or how likely is it that China can influence mainstream media and for people to be able to know that that's happening?
For some, I think what Chihao said, it's very, we don't have to say anything. They prove it themselves, right? Many media houses over the period of time. But, what the Chinese have started doing it and how they're influencing. So they're doing 2-3 things. First, of course, they're publishing the advertorials. So they're paying huge sums to these media houses to publish either their ambassador's article, the Chinese ambassador in India, or of course, publish whatever they sell the material, and that is mainly on either Tibet, the development that they are doing, and what great achievements they have done in Tibet, in Xinjiang, or when the Hong Kong protests were going. I was surprised, shocked. I don't know what term I should use. A major newspaper in India actually published, about China's stand on Hong Kong and what they are doing is correct and how they are doing it and everything.
Okay, let me change tack to something you said earlier, and you were talking about India banning TikTok. Can you explain what kind of an impact that has had?
When TikTok and all were banned, I'll not name, but 2 major left-leaning websites criticized the government for banning it, and I'll tell you the exact word that these people used. So especially this left-leaning news website in India, which is of course started by a foreigner. Now they said that TikTok, they projected TikTok as the liberating nature of TikTok in its article. And in one reference, they called TikTok as a messiah of Indians by terming it as a safe haven for artists, voices on India's margins, and so on. So this is the kind of articles, that were published. And then one website actually went to an extent where they compared the Indian apps and the Chinese apps and said that the Indian apps are very inferior, and the banning of Chinese apps was a big mistake, that the Indian government actually did. And so these were the articles that were published, kind of targeting the Indian government for banning, the app. And TikTok, they were also using, before the ban, they were using a lot of influencers. So Indian influencers who were on TikTok to do their own propaganda. So that was also one of the things that the Chinese were using in India.
So Chihao, what is the role of social media tools here? And is there any recognition of the Chinese social media apps or even hardware, as Namrata has been talking about, and their role in propagating disinformation?
Yes. Cybersecurity groups and here in Taiwan have long been trying to tell people, to warn people about the danger of Chinese software and hardware, right? Because we all know that they have several large phone companies and security camera companies, right? Data companies, software companies, and social media companies. All of that has danger in terms of invading people's privacy and also helping the PRC developing their AI technologies. So people here are aware of that, but we need more people to be aware of that here and also around the world about these kind of dangers. In terms of Chinese social media platforms, yes, people are aware of TikTok, Douyin, and Xiaohongshu, and all sorts of other Chinese apps and their danger to people's privacy and also to people's daily lives, because oftentimes these apps cause addictions. That it creates a bad mental state for especially young generations, right? So all of that, we need more scientific research to prove the effect, the bad effect, or the effect of these apps, these software to people's daily lives, not just in politics, but to their mental health, so that we can have a healthier democracy, a healthier public debate in Taiwan.
Okay, so now China's disinformation campaign has not always had Beijing's desired effect. Andrew Devin, a researcher from Tulane University in the US, explains why.
So essentially, there was this famous incident at that time called the Kansai Airport incident in Japan, and it required people to evacuate from the airport. And the Taiwanese people that were there, the Chinese government said, we will help you to evacuate because we're here right now and we're ready. And then they used this as a propaganda tool to show that the Chinese government is more effective than the Taiwanese one. And at the same time, they were saying, of course, that the Taiwanese citizens are actually Chinese citizens that are being helped. And because they were identifying these Taiwanese citizens as being Chinese, that was the crucial way that it backfired in Taiwan, because every year over the past decade, more and more Taiwanese people are identifying as being Taiwanese rather than being Chinese.
And the other thing, Chihao, that's also aware is people here are getting more and more aware of the kind of disinformation that comes in. And also, like you had mentioned, the government has also made a huge push to make people aware and have kind of mechanisms to try and at least identify what is misinformation or disinformation. So, Chihao, what is it that other countries should be learning from Taiwan's experience, given that it probably has the most disinformation coming from overseas than any other country in the world?
Right. The previous example that the video showed, the Kansai Airport incident, is actually a good example. In my opinion, I have very different interpretation with the video. With the previous researcher. I think it is precisely because that most Taiwanese people identify as Taiwanese, and the Chinese sources are using that to stoke stronger emotion in Taiwan, to circulate the post that in these so-called evacuations, Chinese people are asking Taiwanese people to identify themselves as Chinese citizens before they can get onto these so-called buses. These kind of posts actually created a lot of negative emotions in Taiwan towards the government, towards Taiwanese government's incapability to help Taiwanese citizens in that situation. So I think very different from the previous researcher, I think that's precisely why that incident became so important. It ultimately led to a suicide of one of Taiwan's diplomats who's stationed in Osaka, the second largest city in Japan. So I think that speaks to your question in terms of what can other people learn from us. I think one is to, through data, through research, to identify these psychology or collective sort of societal attributes, vulnerability, if you want to call them. What are these things that can be used to destabilize your society, right?
And Namrata, same question to you before we go. As someone who is familiar with Taiwan's information and media environment, can you tell us what the takeaway should be for other countries from Taiwan's experience?
Yeah, I think we all need to learn. I think Chihao mentioned a very important point that, kind of what are our weaknesses and where we are vulnerable. Like, I feel that they're doing the same in India. They're actually studying what are the weaknesses of India. Like, now they started kind of getting associated with the minority communities, going to their functions, giving them rations, giving their children books and other things. So they're making inroads because they know these are the sections, these are the kind of areas that they can exploit. And I think we should learn from Taiwan.
Absolutely. I'm afraid we've run out of time, but it's been such an interesting and important conversation. I hope to continue at some point, but thank you both so much for your time and your thoughts. Chihao Yu speaking to us from Taipei and Namrata Hasija speaking to us from New Delhi. And for our viewers everywhere, it has been good to have your company as always. Thank you for watching. If you've enjoyed today's episode or have anything you'd like to add to the dialogue, do join the conversation on our social media. And remember, stay informed, stay engaged, and stay connected.